proposal to the Daniels Foundation, we chose as one of the niches that we would look at, and you brought it up, is for nearly every public official who may have done something unethical or even illegal, there was probably a private sector person that participated in that. Yeah. And so we look at that, and we're trying to look at that interface, and we're doing some stuff in New Mexico to try to do it on the public side with public employees and elected officials, that kind of thing. Okay, thanks again. You wanted your purse, okay. And would you like the mouse that doesn't work while you're at it? Okay, at this time we're going to turn to that little niche that we chose in our proposal to the Daniels Foundation, and that was to talk about doing things for public officials. And about the time we had submitted, maybe I think Daniels had already accepted our proposal, a local state legislator passed a resolution in our state legislature, and the resolution in the state legislature directs some public entity to do something, but they never pay you to do it. It's a trick that they get you to do things for free. Passed a resolution that New Mexico State University should develop a curriculum for public policy officials, and that it should be presented to the legislature in the coming legislative session. So we were already on track trying to work on the interface between the public and private and ethics when this resolution came to pass. So we actually ended up doing two things: fulfilling our commitment to Daniels, but also fulfilling a resolution. So very recently, our team leader in this, who's with us today, Diane Prendeville, took it upon herself with some colleagues to go up, and if you ever want an amazing and religious experience, you should lecture to our legislature for 2 hours, which she did. And she used to be about 6 feet tall when she started and weighed several more pounds, but after that 2-hour experience, just beat her down. But it's a trick to talk to legislators, particularly volunteer legislators. And I think Diane and her colleague did a wonderful job. And so I introduced Diane Prendeville, one of our faculty members here, who has been doing this kind of work for a long period of time, to talk to you about her project as a Bill Daniels Fellow. Diane, it's all yours.
Thank you. Buenos dias and good morning. I have to switch glasses here, but thanks for being here. First of all, I want to explain what the CAPE program is, and let me go ahead. I'm going to have a PowerPoint here, and so that'll help a little bit and take the attention away from me on here. Our project, the New Mexico CAPE program, is actually the certification it's called the Certified Advocate for Public Ethics, and it's a program for public officials, elected and appointed, as well as employees around the state who work in the public sector at all levels of government. And this is presented by the New Mexico EDGE, which stands for Education Designed to Generate Excellence in the Public Sector. And that's a program out of the Cooperative Extension Service at NMSU. And we partnered with my home department, which is the Department of Government, and the College of Business. And I was very happy to have this opportunity. We collaborate quite a bit, and the Daniels Fellowship was a really nice opportunity to have some funding to specifically work on this project with a group of wonderful people. And in fact, Bruce is one of my collaborators, and we've had a lot of fun working on this together. Let me give you a little bit of background very quickly. The purpose of the project arises out of the concern that a lot of people in New Mexico have had for quite some time about the state of affairs with regards to ethics in government here. We've had our share of scandals over the years, as Dean Carruthers referred to earlier. And like most states, most levels of government, these have been small and some larger. But last year, with the opportunity to collaborate with the Daniels fund ethics initiative with the College of Business and with our group, the EDGE, and the New Mexico Ethics Alliance, which is actually located at UNM. Some of you may be familiar with it, which we've been working with them for some time already. We were tasked actually by the dean, who happens to be one of our former governors, because he had this interest in ethics in government, to create a certification and courses in general for government officials, both, as I said, elected and appointed, but also for a much larger population of employees in state, county, federal, and local government, as well as tribal government, should they choose to participate. So we just thought this was a really exciting opportunity, and one which we all embrace, and there's a lot of enthusiasm around the state, as we found. So the goal was really to increase access to ethics education at all levels of government and in all types of service organizations, to enhance transparency, strengthen the public's trust in New Mexico's public service organizations. And this was assisted actually by several individuals, organizations, and also through several events that occurred. A House memorial was introduced, as the dean noted, by state legislator Nate Cote, who unfortunately was not re-elected. But he was very concerned with ethics in government, so he initiated this memorial. And it specifically requested NMSU to create a course or series of courses around ethics for public officials. So that created an opportunity for us, again, without the funding, unfortunately, but you know, that happens often. And then our program, the New Mexico EDGE, which was already cooperating with New Mexico Ethics Alliance, we were already providing some courses to public officials through our program for some time in ethics, but there wasn't a set certification. We weren't already working with the legislature, and we didn't really have the momentum for a project like this that would be comprehensive or have the publicity and support behind it that could really send this out into the state. So it helped then that we had this funding from the Daniels Fund, and that we were really given the charge to pull together with a very prestigious individual to sign this letter and call people and get their support. We were able to pull state legislators into this and people from a number of different backgrounds from all over the state representing different organizations and interests to get involved in a curriculum committee. So here's the purpose that this committee was then charged with, was to deliberate and come together, decide on what was really essential, what was important, and how we could develop and tailor an ethics training program, not only for elected and appointed officials around the state at all levels of government, but then that would also be suitable for professional public servants as well, so that we can eventually, we hope to deliver this to all levels, right down to public school districts. So, getting this going, three of us, Bruce, our program director, Mary De Lorenzo, and myself, we served as staff to this curriculum committee, which was made up of individuals from a number of public organizations, and I'll show those to you in a sec, nonprofit organizations or educators and state legislators on this committee. And the committee was given a very specific task, which I think helped because it was very directed. We only had 3 meetings to work. Each meeting was about 3 hours long with lunch. And so it was very specific. It was very well managed, I thought. and well facilitated. We had good folks facilitating, and very direct, and just kept on task. And so in about 9 hours or so, we were able to get through a lot and come up with 14 courses, which make up this certification. And the idea then was that we would accomplish this goal having whatever the group decided, and it turned out to be an actual certification that would be recognized statewide, and we would accomplish this by the end of October of last year, which we did. It was actually formally approved by the entire group early November. So, who were the public partners who were involved? As you can see, I thought we had a pretty good representation of different folks who we thought would be especially important to include, and who also were involved in actual concern with ethics. The auditor's office and Attorney General, who actually are responsible for overseeing these kinds of issues. In terms of the nonprofit sector, we had the Ethics Alliance, Institute for Public Law, an educator and scholar who's extremely helpful and has actually published in the field and was appointee to several presidents around ethics issues and so on, and some other folks that we thought would be helpful and were, and contributed quite a bit to the discussions in the group, and then ourselves representing these different groups on staff. In terms of the process, and here's where I think this kind of process can be helpful for educators. When we think about preparing classes, I imagine that how many people here actually teach an ethics class or is planning on teaching an ethics class? Is that it? Are you guys just here because you're interested in teaching ethics class?
A lot of us integrate ethics into
okay, so you integrated it, yeah. So in terms of looking at a process, I think this process is useful and can be adapted to actually creating an ethics, either an entire curriculum or a class, or looking at how this can be used in a number of different settings. And I'm looking at, sort of thinking ahead to working with community members too, in other communities around the state to empower community groups as well. So in terms of looking at what we did and replicating this, I think a lot of this is pretty practical. It's not, rocket science, but just for purposes of usefulness and passing this on. One of the first things that we did was, of course, remind everybody as we met together initially, why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? And let's make sure that we stick on track. We all agreed initially, too, to what do we mean when we talk about ethics? What is ethics to us? And imagine here that this is a group of leaders in a number of different areas from throughout the state. And the fact that we also have politicians who love to talk and are very bright, very charismatic, and they all want to talk at the same time and have a lot to say, and very helpful, of course. But it was also a real challenge, too, because we're trying to get everybody sort of to agree on some things. And it was fun. It was fun, but it helped to have 3 of us who ended up being facilitators, too, because we had very strong personalities. So while I think sometimes we had 20 people, sometimes we had 18 around there, but generally around 20 to 25 people sometimes in this working group. So at one point, especially when we were facilitating discussions about concepts, what is ethics, what are the principles and shared values that we have, what do we think are the key concepts that we want to pin down so that we know these are the things that need to be included in the trainings, what is it that is going to be most helpful to these public officials and these public employees as they work in their day-to-day, what are some of the things that they're going to be faced with, how do we develop a decision process that will be adaptable, applicable, and helpful for them, and useful without being too cumbersome. So we're trying to work all this out. We ended up breaking up into 3 much smaller groups and facilitating, writing on big paper and posting that up and developing processes and steps, and so that everybody could agree and see what we did, and then documenting everything so that at each meeting we could then review. Here's what we accomplished last time. Here's what we've agreed on. How do we build on each thing? How do we summarize this? And what do we have in common? What's different? What do we need to add? What do we need to take away? So it's really an iterative process that we built on. So we identified commonly held values and discussed these different concepts of ethics to reach a common understanding, and from then we were able to move forward, identifying what are the skills and competencies that these folks will need in their day-to-day work and as they face these potential ethical dilemmas. We also we needed to identify what classes already exist that our programs are already offering to these officials, and what is missing. What do we need to actually develop here in our process? So these included the essential areas that we needed to cover, the existing classes, and then customized classes that we would create. So then at another meeting, at our second meeting, we really got into then, and into the final meeting, drafting a curriculum and these outlining these specific classes, coming up with names for them and so forth. And that included looking at the structure. How would the classes, the program or certificate be structured? How many classes would there be? How long would they be? What would the content consist of? What would we include in that? Would these be required or core classes? Would there be some kind of a pre-test, post-test, or some kind of examination at the end of this? Would there be a certification or recertification? And what would the teaching mode be? What was the difference in the material, or would there be one for elected officials versus public administrators? And then looking at options, would we have a menu of, say, elective classes that the administrators are most likely to be the ones that would want a full certification that they would take versus elected officials who might just choose 1 or 2 classes, or the state legislature who, by law, has to take 2 hours of ethics training every other year. And so most of them sat fairly politely through our training a few weeks ago, but some of them in our evaluations said, why do we have to do this? We're all adults, we know this. Ethics, we don't have to do this. And then other ones were very, very nice and said, this was helpful, I learned something useful, and I figured those were probably the folks who had just been elected for the first time. And I thought, we need to put on the evaluation forms a question asking how long they've been serving, so that we know if in fact those are the newly elected people versus the ones who've been there for a very long time and do feel like they don't need to hear this from us. So anyway, and then so finally we thought, okay, we need to actually discuss and select a name for certification, and then in fact there was value and meaning to certification. We couldn't say that we were certifying somebody to be ethical. That, like, who has a right to do that? So we really played quite a bit with that issue, or what do we call this? So we had to call it a certified advocate for ethics, because we couldn't say that we certified somebody as being ethical. So that actually took up a bit of a discussion, interestingly enough. Finally, potential delivery opportunities, how to deliver the classes or content face-to-face versus online, where, how often, and for whom. And we decided wow, wouldn't it be great if we could actually travel around the state, that's how we currently deliver our classes, and somehow piggyback on local town halls, and I'll get it more into some of the ideas that we have about that, but that makes it a little tougher for public officials, elected officials, to sort of escape having to attend to these things, because I did a presentation recently to the League of Women Voters, and they were very keen on this whole ethics thing, and they said, oh, can we attend the classes? And then we'll put pressure on our local officials, and they'll have to come, and we'll create a town hall, and we'll all be there, and then we'll say, why aren't you here at the ethics training? And I said, ooh, good job. That sounds like a great strategy to get them to attend. But I'm very happy to say, a lot of our elected officials, our state legislators from this area, showed up at the training a few weeks ago, and were actually very intent listening and participating, and I'm so proud of them. They come to all of our meetings at the League and come to our talks and all this, so they're a great group. Okay, so what were the findings that the group came up with? The committee deliberated quite a bit, resulting in this identifying shared principles that they believe should be the basis of the public service ethics training, and these included specific values such as being honest, avoiding and disclosing conflicts of interest, and working for the greater good. There were a whole lot more, but these are some of the basic ones that kind of give you an idea of what they were thinking about. And the discussion also revealed commonly held views about ethics in government, and this is sort of a summary of these, which you can read for yourself. And one of the discussions that we went into, which I think illustrates why localizing ethics training is so critical, and it makes me think about the Wyoming film we saw last night about the cowboy ethics. And I didn't have a chance to tell Brett, but I really appreciated the comment he made at the end, and the dean's comment about considering Native American in different ways of looking at ethics and how culture makes a difference. For those of us from here from New Mexico, or who've lived here a long time, New Mexico government and politics are very much shaped by our culture and our history and people here. So they're a product of our diverse cultural influences. And for example, if you look at the Native American and being comprised of the Pueblo, the Navajo, and Apache cultures, and then Spanish and Mexican influences, which are uniquely reflected in our Constitution, which, for example, protects bilingualism. We're the only constitution, we have the only constitution in the United States. So that makes us unique. We were one of the first that recognized civil rights and civil liberties and protected freedom of religious practice, as well as the equality of women, for example. So that's something that makes us very special. And so it's important to consider the culture when we look at ethics and how we practice ethics. Also, we have a very communitarian perspective, which is in some ways different from that, the cowboy sense of the individual being the focus. So when we think about the collective and family and Pueblo and community being first and caring for everyone, in some ways there's some parallels there to the cowboy. But I think it becomes very important when we talk about, for example, gifts, or in an ethical context, do you take a gift or not? How do you respond to receiving a gift if you're a public official? Or giving someone a job when you've been elected to a position, because there's the issue of reciprocity and looking after community members. You know, the whole issue of pork barrel spending, that's never going to go away, and especially not in a community or in a state where, you know, familia and community is so critical. And the idea is that you owe to your community, to take care of each other. So when you're in the position of responsibility to look after each other, that's what you do. You care for each other. You give each other the gifts that you've earned when you're in that position. So the concept of ethics then can be very different. And it requires a sensitivity and looking at ethics and what's right and wrong with a different lens from the perspective of those people rather than from the outside looking in and judging. So when I talk with my students, for example, or with the group, we have to be very careful about how we approach discussing a behavior that maybe on surface doesn't seem right, or seems like this doesn't work, this doesn't quite click with what I'm used to. But if a student gives me a gift at the end of a semester, I am going to think about, before grades are in, I'm going to think about how I respond to that. And I thank you so much. Would you wait until after grades are in? This is very kind of you. I appreciate that. There's all sorts of issues, but how close do you become with people who are your students? Do you allow them to become part of your family? How close do you allow that? There are all sorts of issues, but we can get into that because of culture here. Directives. What were the directives that we as a staff were given? When you think about how are we going to prepare or develop these courses, the group decided, you know what, we need to use a principle or values-based approach. This makes sense based on the values we agreed upon. This is how we want to go. Okay, so let's identify standards of conduct. There were certain things that they agreed on. These are just a few, but again, it gives you an idea of where they wanted to go, what they saw was important, and it really helped us to have a sense of, while we outline the courses and give them names and so on, the instructors who are going to be tasked with actually teaching these classes are going to need to understand the underlying principles or values and motives that the group wants, and how do you approach teaching these classes. So the assumptions are, with this principle or values-based approach, so everybody's on the same page. Of course, Kantian, everyone has the ability to conceive of moral actions. All people have this inherent dignity as rational and autonomous human beings, and each person should be treated as someone with unconditional worth. So you start with these assumptions as the basis of all your actions and decision making. And when you provide a practical and useful decision process for solving ethical dilemmas, you use this approach, which means considering the following. Number one, what is the underlying principle by which I'm making this decision? For example, does my decision further the public good? Now, from a logical perspective, we hope that that's what someone who works in public service will first consider. How will my decision affect, who will it hurt, who will it benefit? Is this decision going to further the public good? Okay, then how does my behavior affect the public trust? How will it look? Because as we know, even if you're doing the right thing, perception is everything. So image is critical. Because like conflict of interest, for example, even if you don't have a conflict of interest, but it's perceived that you do, it's the same thing, right? Because if it comes out in the news or if people think that you're doing wrong, it's as if you did. So you have to consider, how does it look? And finally, could my decision be replicated by others as an action that is morally worthy? So these are some of the things that we're using as a test of one's decision-making. So finally, ethics training should contribute to developing an ethical culture in government organizations too. And this was important. They wanted leaders to understand, especially those with policy-making authority, that ethics is worth investing in. Ethics training is really important. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be continual, so that it happens at least once or twice a year. And it's something that is supported from leadership down, and that it's at all levels. So that, and that's why I'm interested in thinking, how can we take this to the community, to the neighborhood, to the schools, K through 12? How can we integrate all this? How can we use our students as interns working in the community? How can we also provide trainings and concepts and decision-making tools that allow us to take these skills and knowledge into our daily lives, so that it's a whole way of thinking and being that isn't so artificial that you think, oh, okay, wait, stop. Now I have to be ethical in my work. How am I going to be now versus how I interact with my friends, my family, my associates, whatever. That it should be a whole way of being. So, what did we end up with? Well, this certified advocate for public ethics, we came up with 14 classes, 11 are required, 3 are electives, just because we happen to have 3 that made sense right now. But as the program is implemented, we've offered that first class now to the state legislature, but we're going to continue to provide classes. We have some in January. Thank you. And we'll continue with those, and we'll have more classes as those come along. Let's see. I'm going to get past these because I only have 5 minutes, and I don't need to get through the class descriptions. But I did want to tell you some of our ideas for working with communities and actually implementing the program in some interesting ways. Okay. We want to increase accessibility. What slide is on 17? So I'm going to jump ahead. Here we go. So bringing K to local communities, working with other institutions, colleges and universities around the state. We can seek financial sponsors for scholarships to reduce the cost, increase accessibility, and inclusivity. So that it's not just something for elected appointed officials, not just something for government workers, but something that community organizations, neighborhood associations, individual citizens, school kids, young people can get involved in, that they can attend, that they can participate in. It's something that we can launch out into the community. And in the past, when we first started our program, the New Mexico Edge, we actually got a good-sized scholarship, a grant from a company in the state, and we were able to give out a whole bunch of scholarships for small amounts. Our classes are only $50 for a 3-hour training. And if we can maintain that, then it's pretty accessible. And if we can continue to get scholarships, a lot of people can attend these things for free, which is really nice. So it also provides an alternative to academic programs like college, because a lot of the folks who actually come to our trainings may have a GED or a high school diploma. They may have 1 or 2 years of community college, but many times university degree isn't an option for them for a variety of reasons. So this provides them with some professional development, which they're really hungry for. The people we have, once they take our classes, they come back over and over, and they get really excited about certifications. So it's a nice opportunity. And we also value their life and professional experience, their work experience, and give them credit for that. We're also looking at creating partnerships. We're really big about that. Because it gives us an opportunity to share strategies and approaches, what works, what doesn't, materials. All of our stuff is available. So we do share our PowerPoints, our teaching materials, our our exercises and class activities and so on. We create networks of support, and so by also meeting each other, meeting other folks from around the state, our officials are able to get support from each other. A lot of them are in very small rural communities without a lot of resources or support. This way they learn from each other, and some of them have really innovative ideas and are able to gain a lot from that experience as well. We're also thinking about Train the Trainers program for communities that don't have a lot of resources. Why not launch a larger network of providing opportunities for graduate students or faculty or community leaders in other areas, train them to actually deliver some of these courses too, which is a possibility. And wrap it up, okay. Going local, building leadership, this helps to build leadership capacity, share solutions, engages community members. I'm not from the business sector, obviously, duh. But so my concern and my motivation is democratizing, getting people involved in leadership and community action at the grassroots level. How do we engage our citizenry? How do we get them to start trusting government, being a part of their local governance? And it's by educating them and giving the tools that they need to actually feel like we can create ethical government. We can do this ourselves. We can get involved, and we can make this happen. And it facilitates public discussion. It's very exciting. Finally, maximizing learning opportunities by building these ethics education networks, involving students in developing trainings and curricula, involving them in teaching, creating internships, and developing more ethics programs within jurisdictions so that towns, counties, state departments can actually create and implement their own educational ethics programs within their organizations. Oops, I'm going sideways. And that's it. Okay, thank you for your attention.